Senator from Arkansas.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a unanimous consent request. I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations: calendar number 565 and 570, that the nominations be confirmed en bloc, the motions to consider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order to any of the nominations, that any related statement be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The Senator from Iowa.
Reserving the right to object, and I will object, I'd like to just remind my colleagues of a couple important points. First, over the last several weeks, some of my colleagues in the majority have expressed frustration because some of the nominees they support haven't been brought up for a final vote. I must say, this is quite surprising to me. As everyone knows, late last year, the Senate Democrats invoked the so-called nuclear option. The stated reason for doing so, of course, was to strip those of us in the minority of our ability to stop any judicial or executive nominees on the floor. In fact, just before invoking the so-called nuclear option, here's what the majority leader said about it, and I quote, "The change we propose today would ensure executive and judicial nominations an up or down vote on confirmation, yes or no. The rule change will make cloture for all nominations other than the Supreme Court a majority threshold vote, yes or no," end of quote of the majority leader. And of course, 52 Democrats voted to take this unprecedented step, which tossed aside 2 centuries of Senate history and tradition, even though this president has an outstanding record of getting his nominations confirmed. In fact, prior to the president's attempt to fill up the D.C. circuit with judges they didn't need, the Senate had confirmed 215 of the president's judicial nominees, rejecting only 2. That's more than a 99% approval rating of the president's nominees. Notwithstanding that record, however, the majority voted to cut the minority out of the process on the floor. I'd note that there was bipartisan opposition to what the majority leader tried to accomplish. 3 Democrats voted against it, and I have to give credit to the senator from Arkansas who has made this unanimous consent request to be one of those who thought that the minority should not be cut out of the process. The bottom line is that under the precedent 52 Democrats voted to establish, the majority leader now can bring up at any time these nominations for a vote on the floor whenever he decides to do it. If he did, the nominees would be confirmed within no more than 2 hours of debate. So, the minority simply has no ability to stop anyone from getting a vote. There is no filibuster of any nominees anymore. That was the whole point of what the majority chose to do in November. So, Madam President, I object to this unanimous consent request and respectfully suggest that any senator, including the senator from Arkansas, discuss the matter with one individual who has ability to bypass the minority in that matter, and that happens to be the one senator who's a majority leader of the United States Senate. So I do object, and I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from Arkansas.
I would like to respond and further explain my request. Madam President, we have 2 judges that are pending on the calendar right now. In the sequence of judges to be considered, they're number 2 and number 7. One is named Timothy Brooks, the other is James Moody, number 2 and number 7. Tim Brooks was nominated by the White House in June. He was confirmed, or he came out of the Judiciary Committee in October. Jay Moody was nominated by the White House in July, came out of the Judiciary Committee in November. We have 8 judges on the federal bench in Arkansas on the district court level, 8 judges in Arkansas. We now have 2 vacancies. I don't want to be dramatic and declare a judicial emergency, but certainly people should understand that we're only working at 75% horsepower right now, and we need to get these judges confirmed forthwith. Yesterday, I stood at my desk and I notified the Senate that I was going to do that. I didn't hear an objection. I notified the Senate that I was going to make this request. That was my intention. I did not receive an objection, as far as I know, unless maybe a staff person talked to a staff person, but I didn't ever hear of any objection on that. But, Madam President, the real reason I'm doing this, and the true sense of urgency, is bad enough to have this, 25% of our judiciary in Arkansas that needs to be filled, but the real urgency for this is a matter of state law. One of these judges, James Moody, number 7 on the list, he is an elected state court judge. He's an elected trial court judge. Under Arkansas law, that is a nonpartisan position. So our filing deadline for the 2014 election cycle opens on the 24th of February. That's under state law. 24th of February, and it goes to March the 3rd. So here's the problem, Madam President. Today's the 12th. Next week we're on recess. We're about to have a snowstorm, it sounds like, tonight and the next few days. Next week we're on recess. We come back on the 24th. The filing period will already be opened in Arkansas. And I wish I could tell Judge Moody, look, don't worry about it. You're going to be confirmed when we get back. But the way things have worked around here recently, I can't give him that guarantee. I can't give him my word. I can't tell him, no, Judge, don't file for re-election. Just go ahead and wait and trust that this is going to happen. I can't do that under the circumstances. So he's in limbo. And the problem is there are other lawyers and judges in Arkansas that want to run for his position. And as you know, there's a domino effect in the local judiciary, in local bar about this. But the last thing is this. Under Arkansas state law, once he files, he cannot get his name off the ballot. The state law has no provision. These are nonpartisan elections. If they were party elections, he could go to the state party and they could handle it, through their primary process or through their rules or whatever. But that's not the case here. There's no party to go to. Once he files and his name is on the ballot, he's on the ballot. And that's a big problem. So this is causing a lot of problem back home. There's no principle involved here. There's no principle involved here. There's no reason why these two judges should be held over. They should have been done at the end of last year. I asked my colleagues to help me do that. I was told no. We need to get these judges done now so that we don't create this problem in Arkansas. Both these judges are very well qualified. They have all the credentials that the American Bar Association looks at. Every lawyer in Arkansas, as far as I know, unanimously is for both of these. In fact, I heard my colleague, Senator Bozeman of Arkansas, tell the Republican leader last week, he said, Mitch, if you were picking these judges yourself, you couldn't pick any two better judges than this. I mean, that's a paraphrase, but in effect, that's what he said. And that's true. These are non-controversial judges. Both these judges should be confirmed now so we don't cause this problem in Arkansas. Madam President, with that, I yield the floor, but I will continue to push for these nominations. Thank you.
Who yields time?
Madam President.
The senator from North Dakota.
Madam President, I ask to speak as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Also, I see the good senator here from New Mexico. I'm certainly willing to defer to the senator if time is an issue for him. Okay. If it's not, Madam President, I rise this morning to speak on the issue of the military COLA. This is the cost of living adjustment for our military retired. In the budget agreement, the COLA was reduced for military retirees by 1% till they reach age 62. Then the COLA is restored. I'm opposed to this provision in the budget, and I've since co-sponsored legislation to fix it, meaning fully reinstating the COLA for our military retired. Now, the bill we're considering today and we'll be voting on later today fixes the COLA problem. It reinstates the COLA in full. Now, that's good. That's what I want to do, and that's what I believe the vast majority of the members in this body on both sides of the aisle want to do. So we should pass the bill, and I believe this afternoon that we will. Now, the bill that we have been considering this week fixed the COLA problem. It restored the cost of living adjustment for our military retirees, but it did not cover the cost of doing so. The cost of the legislation is about $6.8 billion over a 10-year period, which, of course, is the CBO, Congressional Budget Office scoring period. Now, we can cover that cost, and we should. We've got a deficit and a debt. We've got to address our deficit and debt, and so we've got to make sure that we're paying for things. And we absolutely can do that in this case. And, in fact, we've put forward amendments to do just that. Now, the amendment that I have, first amendment that I joined in putting forward is one that was led by Senator Kelly Ayotte, the senator from New Hampshire. Now, it fully covers the cost of fixing the COLA. The way it worked is it covered that cost by simply requiring that the additional child tax credit statute is properly enforced. Let me explain that. What it requires is that families with children who apply for the additional child tax credit must have Social Security numbers for those children. This is a simple, straightforward enforcement provision to ensure that the law is followed. And why wouldn't we enforce the law, make sure that it's enforced? I believe that's an important part of our job, after all. In fact, I also believe that the Treasury Department supports this enforcement provision as well, and I'd like to cite from a recent Inspector General's report. In 2011, the Treasury Department's Inspector General reported that individuals who were not authorized to work in the United States received billions by claiming the additional child tax credit, and several news investigations found troubling instances of abuse of this tax credit. In just one example, according to a 2012 news report, an undocumented worker in Indiana admitted that his address was used to file tax returns by 4 other undocumented workers who fraudulently claimed 20 children in total, resulting in tax refunds totaling nearly $30,000. The Joint Committee on Taxation estimates that this change would save approximately $20 billion over 10 years. Now, that's $20 billion in savings over 10 years, which obviously far more than covers the $6.8 billion cost of the COLA fix that we are putting forward. Clearly, that works. But I understand that we have not been able to get bipartisan agreement on this provision, on this pay-for. So we need to find something that we can agree on, because we need both Republicans and Democrats to pass this legislation to fix the COLA. And that's why I have since offered another pay-for. And this is a simple one-page amendment, that provides a pay-for restoring the cost of living adjustment for our military retirees. What it does is it simply extends the provisions of the Budget Control Act, the budget that we passed, for one more year, from 2023 to 2024. And I'm pleased to say that's what we will be voting on this afternoon. Not because I've offered the amendment, but rather because leadership has agreed to offer the House version of the COLA fix. That's the legislation that we will be voting on this afternoon, which has the pay-for that I've just outlined. Now, it's not identical to the amendment that I've submitted, but it's very, very similar, very close. And it ensures that our military retired will receive their much-deserved retirement. I've urged my Republican colleagues in our caucus to fix this problem, and I have urged my Democrat colleagues on the Senate floor to fix this problem. And today, I believe we will. In a bipartisan way, today I believe we will fix the cost of living adjustment, restore it for our military retirees, and do it in a way where we pay for it, so we make sure that we are not increasing the deficit or the debt. As a former governor and now as a senator, I've had the honor and the privilege to work with our military men and women. I've been to Iraq and I've been to Afghanistan. And I've gotten the calls when one of our heroes makes the ultimate sacrifice. I know they put it all on the line for us. And so today I ask my fellow senators to join with me and vote for our men and women in uniform, to vote to fix the COLA for our military retired, and to support those great men and women who wear the uniform and who honor us, who protect us, and who serve this nation in the cause of liberty and freedom with their dedicated service. Join with me and support them and vote for this legislation. Thank you, Madam President. With that, I yield the floor.
Madam Chair.
The senator from New Mexico.
Hey, thank you, Madam President. I rise today to talk about health care for our rural veterans. This is a critical issue to many veterans who are left behind and to many who are not getting the care that they need. But first, Madam President, I want to say how important it is that we have reached an agreement to restore the cut to pensions for working-age military retirees. This cut and cost-of-living adjustments for military retirees should never have been included in the budget bill. But let's be clear, the bipartisan budget agreement was critical to New Mexico and our nation because it rolled back damaging sequestration cuts that hurt our military and military families. But working-age military retirees should not have to bear the burden. Many of these men and women have given decades of service to our nation. They were willing to give everything for us. They should get the benefits that they've earned. I've been working from the beginning to restore this cut to their COLA benefits. I've been very happy that we have a bipartisan agreement to move forward and ensure we keep our promise to them. Now, Madam President, I come to the floor today to also talk about rural veterans and a Rural Veterans Improvement Act. I was proud to introduce this bill with Senator Heller from Nevada earlier this week, because when it comes to veterans' health care, we know there are challenges. We know that we can do better, and we know we have to do better. Over 6 million veterans live in rural areas, including about 1/3 of those that fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. 3 million of those rural veterans receive health care through the VA. Our veterans have fought halfway around the world for our freedom. We should go the extra mile for them. Senator Heller and I we both come from rural western states. We know the difficulties veterans face when distances are too far and choices are too few. And so our legislation would do 4 things: improve access to mental health services, expand transportation grants, hire and retain more medical professionals in rural areas, and give Congress and the VA improved tools to improve the quality of rural facilities. First, let me start with mental health care. This is crucial. Veterans are struggling when the help they need is not available or is very far away. One of my constituents lives in a rural area in northern New Mexico. He fought in Vietnam and was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. He required therapy 2 full days a week for 2 years, vital care that probably saved his life. The VA was there for him, and he is grateful. But he had to drive to Albuquerque, over 3 hours away, to get that essential care. The veterans in my state are clear. They need better access to treatment and more mental health options. One size does not fit all. Conventional therapy does not work for everyone. Veterans groups like the Wounded Warrior Project have long supported alternative treatments and more holistic methods. Tribal governments are also working with the VA to use traditional Native American healing techniques, helping their veterans with PTSD and other diagnoses. These veterans are in pain. They are at increased risk of suicide. Help has to be there when they need it. Our bill would enable the VA to work with non-VA fee-for-service providers for veterans with service-connected mental health issues. When conventional treatment is not available or where alternative treatment is not an option. Second, even the best health care is useless if you can't get to it. I have talked with many veterans in my state about this, and it is a big problem across New Mexico. Veterans in Carlsbad face a 6-hour drive to the VA hospital in Albuquerque, 300 miles away, one way. One such veteran fought bravely in World War II. He's in his 80s now. He has to get up at 5 a.m., make the trip to Albuquerque to see medical specialists. Sometimes he doesn't get home until midnight. Thanks to the great volunteer drivers at Southeast New Mexico Veterans Transportation Network, he is able to get there. But it is an exhausting day. Another of my constituents recently retired to Chama, New Mexico, a rural community in the north. He and his wife built a home there, looking forward to retirement. The VA outreach clinic was nearby, but its contract was not renewed, and it closed. His only option now is the VA clinic in Espanola, 80 miles each way through the southern Rockies. And when winter storms come, as they do in northern New Mexico, he may not be able to get there at all. The VA offers transportation grants to help, but only for veterans in what they call highly rural areas, with fewer than 7 people per square mile. Not for those in rural areas, in small towns like Chama, and the small towns in Nevada, and so many other states. They need help too. The miles are just as long, and the journey is just as hard. Our bill will help by expanding VA transportation grants to include rural communities, and it will not require matching funds for grants up to $100,000, making it easier for these communities to apply for assistance. Third, rural VA clinics, like their private counterparts, have trouble getting staff and keeping staff. This is not news to veterans who see constant turnover of doctors and nurses and other health care professionals, or who have to travel long distances just to see anyone at all. Our bill will establish a VA training program, working with university medical centers to train health care professionals, serving rural veterans at outpatient clinics. Those who complete the program and a 3-year assignment will receive a hiring preference for jobs with the Veterans Health Administration. We also propose a pilot program for housing incentives for health care professionals to work in rural VA facilities. And we are proposing that the VA streamline the hiring of military medical professionals transitioning to the civilian world into the VA system. Rural VA health centers have a big job. They do their best. We have to do all we can to help them, to get staff and to keep staff with incentives, with training, with innovation. It isn't easy, but it's essential. Fourth, we call for a full review of VA community-based outpatient clinics in rural and highly rural areas so we can prioritize expansions and improvements, making sure dollars are well spent and resources go as far as possible. We also call for a report to Congress on whether to add polytrauma centers in rural areas to help veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan recover from multiple major injuries, like serious burns and traumatic brain injuries. Every day, American service members wake up far from home, and every day they stand watch. They do their job they promised to do, and not only if it's easy or only if it's convenient. We owe them the same promise. Rural veterans should not be left behind. They should get the care they need and deserve. Again, I want to thank Senator Heller for working with me on this bill. He understands the problem. He's committed to finding solutions. Our bill is a step forward for the health and well-being of our veterans. This is about essential care, about access, about honoring our commitment to the men and women who have sacrificed so much for our community. I would urge my colleagues to support the bill, and Madam President, I would ask that Senator Durbin be given consent to speak immediately after me, and I would yield the floor. I see Senator Durbin on the floor. Yeah.
Without objection.
I want to thank the Senator from New Mexico. Madam President,
The senator from Illinois.
when it comes to understanding the influence of big money donors on congressional and presidential campaigns, the numbers don't lie. In 2012, the top 32 donors to super PACs spent as much money as every single small donation to President Obama and Governor Romney combined. The top 32 donors to super PACs spent as much money as every single small donation to President Obama and Governor Romney combined. That means 32 individuals contributed as much as 3.7 million Americans. In 2012, candidates for both the House and Senate raised the majority of their funds from large donations of $1,000 or more. 40% of all contributions to Senate candidates came from donors who maxed out at the $2,500 contribution limit, representing just 0.02% of the American population. The amount of money that special interest lobbyists, wealthy donors, corporations, and super PACs are willing to spend to shape policy has grown exponentially since Citizens United, and it's expected to increase. This dramatic increase in spending tells us that special interests are not going to be shy about saying to members of Congress, if you vote against our interest, we'll spend millions to make sure you never get a chance to vote again. That's a terrible reality for many members of Congress who are trying to make honest decisions about policy. It's an even worse statement about our democracy. I think it's time for fundamental reform for the way we finance congressional elections. We need a system that allows candidates to focus on their constituents, their districts, and their states instead of fundraising. We need a system that encourages ordinary Americans, the candidates I call mere mortals, to make their voice heard with small, affordable donations to candidates of their choice. That's why I'm introducing the Fair Elections Now Act. The Fair Elections Now Act will dramatically change the way campaigns are financed in America. This bill lets candidates focus on the people they represent, regardless of whether these people have wealth or whether they're going to attend big money fundraisers. Fair elections candidates would be in the policy business, regardless of what policies are preferred by the special interest. I want to thank Senators Boxer, Brown, Cardin, Franken, Gillibrand, Harkin, Heinrich, Klobuchar, Leahy, Markey, Menendez, Merkley, Murphy, Sanders, Shaheen, and Warren for joining me in this effort. The Fair Elections Now Act will help restore public confidence in congressional elections. It provides qualified candidates for Congress with grants, matching funds, and vouchers from the Fair Elections Fund to replace campaign fundraising that now relies largely on lobbyists, wealthy donors, corporations, and other special interests. In return, participating candidates would agree to limit their campaign spending to amounts raised from small dollar donors plus the amounts provided from the Fair Elections Fund. There are 3 stages for Senate candidates under this bill. To participate, candidates would first need to prove their viability by raising a minimum number and an amount of small dollar qualifying contributions from in-state donors. Once a candidate qualifies, that candidate must limit the amount raised from each donor to $150 per election. For the primary, participants would receive a base grant that would vary in amount based on the population of the state that the candidate seeks to represent. Participants would also receive a 6-to-1 match for small dollar donations up to a defined matching cap. The candidate could raise an unlimited amount of $150 contributions if needed to compete against high-spending opponents. For the general election, qualified candidates would receive an additional grant, further small dollar matching, and vouchers for purchasing TV advertising. The candidate could continue to raise an unlimited amount of $150 contributions if needed. Instead of spending so much time courting donors and super PACs, fair election candidates would have an incentive to spend their time with the middle-class Americans that they want to represent. Candidates would have an incentive to seek small donations, and citizens would have an incentive to donate. Under fair elections, the average citizen would know their small donation of $150 would be converted to a $900 donation through the 6-to-1 fair elections match. They'd also be eligible for a refundable tax credit. The Fair Elections Now Act would establish the My Voice tax credit to encourage individuals to make small donations to campaigns. The maximum refundable amount for the tax credit would be $25 for individuals, $50 for joint filers. To ensure the tax credit targets small donors, it is only available to individuals who do not contribute more than $300 to a candidate or political party in any given year. Madam President, our country faces major challenges. Everybody knows we need to reduce the deficit, modernize our energy policy, create good-paying jobs, reform the tax code, and many other things. What many people may not know is that at every turn, there are high-powered special interests fighting each and every one of these proposals. It's difficult for members of Congress not to pay attention to the concerns of these special interests when the members have to turn and raise money for their own campaigns. This bill would change the whole ballgame. It would reduce the influence of these special interest lobbyists and wealthy donors. As a result, the bill would enhance the voice of average Americans. Let me be clear. I honestly believe that the overwhelming majority of the people serving in political life are good, honest people. And I believe that senators and congressmen are guided by the best of intentions. But we are stuck in a terrible system. The perception is that politicians are corrupted because of all the big money we each have to raise. And whether it's true or not, that perception and the loss of trust that goes with it makes it incredibly difficult for the senators to solve tough problems. That's why so many Americans have Congress in such low regard. This problem, the perception of pervasive corruption, is fundamental to our democracy, and we need to address it. Fair elections is not a far-fetched idea. Fair election systems are already at work in cities and states around America. Similar programs exist and are working well in jurisdictions throughout the country, from Maine to Arizona. These programs are bringing new faces and new ideas into politics, making more races more competitive, dramatically reducing the influence of special interest. The vast majority of Americans agree it's time to fundamentally change the way we finance political campaigns. Recent polling shows that 75% of Democrats, 66% of independents, and 55% of Republicans support fair election style reform. The Fair Elections Now Act is supported by numerous good government groups, former members of Congress from both parties, prominent business leaders, and even some lobbyists. Everyone's entitled to a seat at the table, but no one's entitled to a special seat, or maybe the only seat. The Fair Elections Now Act will reform our campaign finance system so members of Congress can focus on implementing policies in the best interest of the people that sent them to Washington. Madam President, you just finished a campaign, and I know from visiting with you in your home state, you worked hard. And I'm in the midst of a re-election campaign myself. And I know that I'm working hard, and a lot of time is being spent on the telephone, raising money from a lot of generous people. I say in politics there are the millionaires and the mere mortals. I'm in the second category. And that means I can't write a check to cover the cost of a campaign. I have to hope that enough people want to support me in my effort. And with those contributions, I will be buying media, primarily television, radio, internet advertising, some mailings, paying for a headquarters and volunteers. It's expensive in a big state like Wisconsin or Illinois. Now we're in the Citizens United era where the traditional campaigns that I've just described are frankly not even close to the reality of what candidates face. One senator, one incumbent Democratic senator now, up for re-election, has had over $8 million spent against her in her home state with negative advertising that's gone on for months. For months. It's being paid for by some very wealthy billionaires. These billionaires, in this case the Koch brothers, spent, I believe, $248 million of their own money in the last election cycle. They are, in fact, a political party to themselves. They decide the candidates they support, which coincidentally are all in the other political party, and they invest huge sums of money in those election efforts. Make no mistake, we're raising money on the Democratic side too, but not nearly to the numbers that we see on the other side. This business of politics is being swamped with money in amounts and levels we have never seen before. What it means is that if an incumbent or even a challenger wants to have a viable campaign, they spend more and more time raising money if they can't write a personal check to cover it. And most of us can't. And so instead of being back in my state, working on issues that are important in the Senate, you spend a lot of time fundraising. We've become so used to it, it's like the frog in that pot of water on the stove that may not sense the increase in temperature until the water's boiling and it's too late. We're in that same predicament here. We are watching election after election the cost of campaigns go through the roof. It discourages good people from engaging in the political process. It makes small contributors feel like they're such small peanuts that nobody even notices. We have to change that whole concept. I'm reluctant to say this, but so far this campaign finance reform bill is only being co-sponsored and sponsored by members of one political party. I have tried for years to get Republican support for campaign finance reform. The only Republican senator who would ever join me was Arlen Specter of Pennsylvania, who ultimately changed political parties on me, and I shouldn't say not on me, but changed political parties, and then I didn't have bipartisan sponsorship. But the point I'm getting to is this should be a bipartisan issue. I have no doubt that in a limited campaign with limited expenditures, I'd still have enough money to get my message out in Illinois, and I'm sure my opponent would too. That would be a godsend in sparing me and whoever from raising a lot of money, and a relief to the voters who get sick and tired of the political advertising that swamps the screens in the closing days of a campaign. Fair elections now is an effort to move in that direction. It's a new concept, but it's one we should look at honestly. We can clean up the election campaigns in America. We can be responsive to the needs of our constituents. We can further the goals of our democracy and do it in a fashion that is affordable and allows mere mortals to compete. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President,
The senator from Missouri,
move we suspend the quorum call.
without objection.
Madam President, I want to talk a little bit about
the letters I've received and the messages we've received in the office the last week regarding the changes we see going on in health care. Quite a bit of discussion last week about how health care impacts the workplace, and I think a lot of misinformation out. This report doesn't say, as some people have alleged, the CBO projection, the Congressional Budget Office projection, doesn't say that 2 million more people are going to have part-time jobs. It says the equivalent job loss because of the Affordable Health Care Act is the equivalent of 2.3 million people losing full-time jobs. That may mean 10 million people that otherwise would have had full-time jobs have part-time jobs. The other thing is it's 3 times as big as the number that was on the table when people voted for the Affordable Care Act. At that time, the Congressional Budget Office says if this law passes, that there will be 800,000 fewer jobs than if this law doesn't pass. The collective impact on the economy is 800,000 fewer jobs. Well, last week they said there'd be 2.3 million fewer jobs, 3 times, roughly 3 times the amount that the earlier estimate was. And like so many other estimates in this law, the reality of the law turns out to be different than the estimates, and surely that was an estimate that nobody wanted. I can't imagine that anybody that voted for this bill, and I didn't vote for it, but I can't imagine that anybody that voted for this bill thought that's a really great thing. We're going to lose 800,000 jobs if this bill passes. I assume they thought the good this bill will do will offset losing 800,000 jobs. Now we find out it's 2.3 million jobs and all kinds of information that the good that was supposedly going to be done is not what people had hoped for. While we're talking about the workplace, I've got a letter here from a person who's the president of one of our community colleges in the state of Missouri, and he says, because of the Affordable Care Act, we've reviewed all part-time employment to ensure compliance with the Affordable Care Act, which defines full-time as 30 hours or more per week. Without specific guidance in knowing the difference in a credit hour and a working clock hour, we've reduced part-time faculty teaching loads to ensure that nobody works more than 30 hours. And this isn't the only letter or contact that all of us have had on this topic. We know that the unintended consequence of this law on the workplace was that people are now told who they don't have to insure. State governments, community colleges, big companies, all looking at a law for the first time that supposedly says who you have to insure, though the President certainly feels he has the authority that none of us can find anywhere in the law to decide when the law is going to go into effect and when it's not. But the law says who you have to insure, and suddenly people who for a long time have provided health care benefits because they thought it was the right thing to do or the competitive thing to do, now respond to this directive from the federal government that says what you have to do, and that means that's all you have to do. So all of these employees who may have worked 25 hours, 28 hours, 32 hours in the past and all got insurance now are suddenly working less than 30 hours, and I've talked to enough of these employees to know that this isn't because they don't want to work more. This isn't because they want to make less money. This isn't because they want to teach one less class. It's because the law has had that kind of impact on the workplace. The other letters, the other promises, we're going to get better coverage for less cost. Surely somebody is getting better coverage for less cost, but my guess is that is a much smaller group than the people that are losing their insurance, and because of the so-called broader and better coverage, the so-called better coverage have more costs. Here's a letter from Kathy in Wentzville, Missouri. She says, I carry insurance through a large corporation, and my premium increased this year because the minimum standards in the law affect my plan. The premium increased by 25%. She goes on in no uncertain terms to suggest that she doesn't like the Affordable Care Act or think it was affordable. Jeff from St. Joseph said, "Thank you for the opportunity to share my family's opinion on Obamacare. First off, I'd like to state that we've experienced increases in our health insurance. My employer's insurance has doubled, of which I pay 1/2. My family's separate insurance policy has risen as well, with cancellation due in December. I've considered canceling my own health insurance through my employer so I can provide for my family's health insurance at their new rates." This was a family that a few months ago thought they were going to be able to continue to keep what they had. They liked what they had. They thought they could afford what they had. Now they're deciding who's going to go without insurance so other people can have insurance in the family at the higher rate. William from St. Louis, Missouri says, "My insurance was canceled in December. Says my insurance rates have been drastically increasing each year since the law was passed. 4 years ago, I had a policy for my family with a $500 deductible and the ability to go to any hospital or doctor in St. Louis. It cost $1,000 a month. Now I have a policy with, he says, with a $2,000 deductible, and I can't go to the doctor I used to go to." And he says his policy now that doesn't allow him to go to the doctor he used to go to doesn't cost $1,000 a month any longer. It costs $1,500 a month. Ted in St. Joseph said that his doctor has changed the way he does business. Says he's downsized the types of plans he accepts and is moving to a customer base with higher incomes. So Ted's doctor, according to Ted in St. Joseph, has stopped taking patients with Blue Cross Blue Shield because of increased cost, and now Ted, who, by the way, liked the doctor he had, now has to find another doctor that will take the coverage that he can get. Steve in St. Joseph and his wife are raising their 14-year-old grandson, and all three have seen their insurance costs, they think, because of the Affordable Care Act. His grandson's policy went up $50 a month, from $104 to $154. His wife's deductible went from $1,000 per year to $5,000 per year, and her insurance cost over $800 a month. Now, he goes on to say, and I thought about whether I should read this or not. I assume they've talked about this too, but he says, if we were to get divorced, her premium would be less than $200 a month. I think Steve is not suggesting that he and his wife should get divorced, but just talking about, again, the unintended consequences here. A family that's together can't afford to have the coverage they had. Her coverage is $800 a month, but as a substitute teacher, I believe that's what this letter says she does, her income would qualify her for a $200 a month policy instead of the $800 they're paying now. Sandy from Armstrong, Missouri, says she received a letter from her insurance company notifying her that her premiums were about to increase. She went on healthcare.gov to find plans she and her husband could qualify for, and the plans she found were double the premiums she'd been paying. Kelly, Farmington, Missouri, works at the HR department, the Human Resources Department at a bank. She feels that healthy groups will be paying more for insurance because of ACA and because of the expanded coverage. Her department's received many questions, she says, about health care coverage that feels limited in how much they can really tell anybody because they don't know how the new law is going to apply. The law of unintended consequences continues to be the law that applies here. Missourians and people all over the country are contacting us and asking how much damage we're willing to do to the health care system that was working to get more people included in that system. There were ways to do this every one of which I believe was legislatively proposed in 2009. Small changes that would have made a big difference in a health care system that was working for people who were in that system. We need to figure out the few ways to get more people in that system. Instead, we've had dramatic impact on the best health care system in the world, and people are beginning to figure that out. Madam President, I note the absence of a quorum as I yield the floor.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Madam President.
The Assistant Majority Leader.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that disposition of the House message with regard to S-25.
The Senate is in a quorum call.
Quorum call be suspended. I'm sorry.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent. Excuse me, Madam President. Let me ask the staff. I'm sorry. I ask unanimous consent that upon disposition of the House message with respect to S-25, the Senate proceed to the executive session to consider the following nominations. Calendars number 497, 498, 493, 494, 495, 496, 531, 534, that the Senate proceed to vote without intervening action or debate on the nominations in the order listed. The motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order, that any related statements be printed in the record, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action, and the Senate then resume legislative session. Further, that there be 2 minutes for debate equally divided in the usual manner for prior to each vote, and all votes after the first be 10 minutes in length.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Madam President.
The Senator from Florida.
Madam President, I ask consent to speak as if in morning business for 5 minutes.
Without objection.
Madam President, with what we went through in the state of Florida in the attempts of suppressing voters, you would think with the experience of people having stood in line in order to vote for 5 to 7 hours that it would have put this issue to rest. But they're back at it again. And this time in a very subtle way. The governor's office, through his appointed Secretary of State, who is the chief elections officer, has now interpreted a statute that in a municipal election that students at the University of Florida cannot early vote prior to the election on campus at their student center. The interpretation is made that it's an educational facility and does not qualify according to the statute on a technical reason that it is not a government-owned conference facility, when indeed it's owned by the state of Florida through the university, and indeed it is a conference facility for many, many conferences, outside groups as well as student groups. No, what it is an attempt in a run-up to the November election to try to make it more difficult, less convenient for students to vote. As it turns out, in this particular municipal election coming up shortly, students would have to go across town some 1.5 miles in another location some 3 miles away. And of course, students, as busy as they are, that's going to discourage them. And so if they end up doing this for this special election in March, a municipal election, they're of course going to try to do it for the November election when we have a statewide election for the governor and the cabinet. Why? Well, an attempt to suppress students' votes who may not be voting for the people in power that are trying to suppress their votes. It's all the more of interest because there will be on the ballot a proposed constitutional amendment to change the state constitution to allow, by doctor's prescription, medical marijuana, something that has generated interest in all sectors of society, but particular among students, another reason they want to come out to vote. The whole idea of early voting is to try to make it more convenient for people to be able to vote that they might not find it because of a babysitter problem, a work problem on Election Day. But early voting, as we saw in the experience of the 2012 election, the days were shortened from 14 to 8. They cut out the Sunday before the Tuesday election, a day that Professor Dan Smith, doing a study at the University of Florida, found that those that availed themselves for Sunday voting were primarily Hispanics and African Americans. And indeed, the attempts were made in limiting the number of early voting locations within a county, and then of those early vote locations having a facility that was small so that you could not get a lot of voting machines in. Again, another way, very subtle, of trying to suppress the vote. So the people of Florida naturally were outraged, particularly when they heard stories of the 101-year-old lady that had to stay 3.5 hours in order to cast her vote, and the others that were staying 5 and 7 hours, and they were not going to have their vote taken away from them. And they stood in line. And so the people were outraged. And so there was an attempt to pass a new law. And I will close with this, Madam President. This new law now is being interpreted that the very same suppression efforts are occurring again. And we are simply not going to let this happen if we have to call the Justice Department in. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
The senator from Arizona.
I rise today to talk a little, just for a short period of time, about the magnitude of our budget debt and deficit against the backdrop of the debt ceiling increase.